The December snow fell softly against the frosted windows of the small coffee shop on 16th Street, each flake catching the warm amber light from within before dissolving into the gathering dusk. Hannah Price sat alone at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug that had long since grown cold, watching the steady stream of holiday shoppers hurrying past with their bundled packages and bright scarves. At 34, she had perfected the art of appearing busy while feeling utterly invisible, her laptop open to the same spreadsheet she had been staring at for the better part of an hour without making a single meaningful edit. The familiar weight of solitude pressed against her chest as she observed families walking together, their laughter muffled by the thick glass, but their joy unmistakable in the way they leaned into each other against the cold. Christmas had become a season she endured rather than celebrated, each twinkling light and festive melody serving as a reminder of what she had lost 3 years ago when her mother passed away after a brief but devastating battle with cancer. The holidays they had once shared, filled with homemade ornaments and midnight church services, and the comforting ritual of baking sugar cookies while snow accumulated on the windowsill, now felt like scenes from someone else's life. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table, displaying yet another cheerful invitation to an office holiday party she had no intention of attending. Hannah had become skilled at crafting polite excuses, each one delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized non-profit organization, a job that allowed her to help others while maintaining the emotional distance she had cultivated since her mother's death. Her colleagues saw her as dedicated and reliable, perhaps a little reserved, but none of them knew about the profound emptiness that had taken residence in her chest, growing larger with each passing holiday season. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed softly, and Hannah glanced up from her laptop screen to see a tall man entering with a small boy who could not have been more than 7 years old. The man's coat was slightly too thin for the weather, and she noticed how he gently guided his son to a table near the window, helping him out of his small backpack with the patient care of someone accustomed to being both mother and father. The boy's eyes were wide with excitement as he pressed his face against the glass, pointing at the Christmas decorations strung across the street, and Hannah found herself watching their interaction with a mixture of curiosity and unexpected tenderness. Lucas Mitchell hung his coat over the back of his chair and knelt down to be at eye level with his son, speaking to him in quiet tones that Hannah could not quite hear, but could see in the gentle way his hands moved as he talked. There was something achingly familiar about the careful way he listened to the boy's animated chatter, the same focused attention her own father had given her when she was that age, before work and responsibilities had gradually worn away at the edges of his patience. She observed how Lucas counted the bills in his wallet before approaching the counter, his movements deliberate and economical, and she recognized the particular kind of carefulness that comes from stretching every dollar until it threatens to break. The boy, who had sandy brown hair that stuck up in several directions despite obvious attempts to comb it down, bounced slightly in his seat as he waited for his father to return with their order. His small hands were pressed against the table, and Hannah could see that his sleeves had been carefully mended at the cuffs, the stitching neat but visible. When Lucas returned with a single hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and a plain coffee for himself, the boy's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made Hannah's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She watched as Lucas carefully divided the whipped cream so that his son could have most of it, keeping just a small portion for his own coffee, and something about the quiet generosity of the gesture made her look away, feeling as though she were intruding on a moment too intimate for observation. But she found herself glancing back again and again, drawn by something she could not quite name. Perhaps it was the way Lucas listened so intently when his son spoke, leaning forward slightly and nodding as if the boy's words carried the weight of the most important conversation in the world. Or maybe it was the careful way he helped his son navigate the hot chocolate, steadying the mug with his larger hands while teaching him to blow on it gently before taking a sip. There was a tenderness in these small actions that spoke of countless similar moments, a routine born of love and necessity and the quiet heroism of single parenthood. Hannah realized she had been staring when Lucas looked up and caught her eye, offering a brief, apologetic smile as if he were somehow sorry for taking up space in the coffee shop. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly returned her attention to her laptop, but not before noticing the genuine warmth in his expression, the kind of openness that seemed increasingly rare in the careful distance most adults maintained with strangers. She tried to focus on her work, but found herself acutely aware of their quiet conversation, the soft sound of the boys' laughter, and the patient way Lucas answered what seemed to be an endless stream of questions about everything from snowflakes to Christmas trees to whether reindeer really existed. When the boy accidentally knocked over his hot chocolate, sending the warm liquid spreading across their small table, Hannah watched Lucas's reaction carefully. There was no irritation or frustration in his voice as he quietly reassured his son that accidents happen, using napkins from the dispenser to clean up the mess, while the boy's eyes filled with tears of embarrassment. Instead, Lucas knelt down beside his chair and spoke to him in the same gentle tone he had used earlier, and Hannah could see the boy's shoulders relax as whatever words of comfort his father offered took effect. The interaction lasted only a few minutes, but it revealed something essential about the kind of man Lucas was, the way he prioritized his son's emotional well-being over his own likely disappointment at the wasted money. As they prepared to leave, the boy tugged on his father's sleeve and pointed directly at Hannah, saying something that made Lucas glance in her direction with a look of mild embarrassment. The boy's voice carried just enough for her to hear him ask whether the sad lady needed a friend for Christmas, and Hannah felt her cheeks burn with the recognition that her carefully maintained facade had been seen through by a 7-year-old's unfiltered perception. She pretended to be absorbed in her laptop screen, but she could feel Lucas's hesitation as he clearly debated whether to approach her table or simply guide his son toward the door. After a moment that stretched longer than it should have, Lucas appeared at her table, his son standing slightly behind him with the mixture of shyness and curiosity that children display when meeting new people. Lucas cleared his throat softly and asked if she would excuse the interruption, explaining that his son Jake had insisted they invite her to join them for dinner because nobody should be alone during Christmas. His voice carried the particular combination of pride and slight mortification that comes from a child's complete lack of social filters, and Hannah could see that he was prepared for her to politely decline what was clearly an impulsive offer from a well-meaning child. She looked down at Jake, whose earnest brown eyes held none of the calculated kindness adults often displayed during the holidays, just genuine concern for a stranger who looked sad. Something about his unguarded expression reminded her of her mother's unwavering belief that small acts of kindness could change everything, a philosophy Hannah had gradually abandoned as grief taught her to protect herself through isolation. She heard herself accepting the invitation before her rational mind could construct the usual polite refusal, adding almost defensively that she would only stay for one dinner. That was all, as if establishing boundaries could somehow contain whatever emotional risk she was taking. Lucas's surprise was evident in the way his eyebrows raised slightly, but he recovered quickly and suggested a small diner a few blocks away that he described as nothing fancy, but warm and welcoming. Jake bounced on his toes with excitement, clearly pleased that his spontaneous invitation had been accepted. and Hannah found herself closing her laptop and gathering her things with movements that felt both foreign and natural, as if she were remembering how to do something she had once known well. As they bundled into their coats and prepared to venture out into the snowy evening, she caught Lucas watching her with an expression of gentle curiosity, as if he were trying to understand what had prompted her to accept an invitation from strangers. The diner Lucas had chosen was exactly as he had described it, with worn vinyl booths and the kind of home-style cooking that filled the air with the comforting aromas of roast chicken and fresh bread. Christmas decorations hung somewhat haphazardly from the ceiling, clearly put up by someone with more enthusiasm than artistic training, but the overall effect was cheerfully welcoming rather than polished. Jake slid into the booth first, his small body taking up barely a quarter of the space, and gestured for Hannah to sit beside him with the unself-conscious hospitality that children possess before they learn to be cautious about opening their hearts to new people. As they settled in and looked over the simple menu, Hannah learned that Lucas worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, driving for a delivery service during the day and stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. He spoke about his work without complaint or self-pity, simply stating facts in the matter-of-fact way people discuss weather or traffic. Jake, meanwhile, filled the conversational spaces with stories about his second-grade teacher, his best friend Marcus, who had moved away last month, and his elaborate theories about how Santa Claus managed to fit down all the chimneys in one night. Hannah found herself drawn into their easy rhythm, responding to Jake's questions and laughing at his observations in ways that felt rusty but genuine, like muscles remembering how to work after a long period of disuse. Lucas watched the interaction between his son and this unexpected dinner companion, with a mixture of protective concern and growing amazement at how naturally Jake seemed to connect with her. He had been worried that his son's impulsive invitation would make the woman uncomfortable, but instead he observed something shifting in her expression as the evening progressed, a gradual softening around her eyes that suggested she was rediscovering something she had lost. When Jake excused himself to use the restroom, carefully sliding out of the booth with the exaggerated importance children bring to simple tasks, Lucas found himself alone with Hannah for the first time since their introduction. The brief silence that followed was filled with the comfortable sounds of the diner around them, the gentle clatter of dishes and murmured conversations creating a backdrop for their tentative attempt at adult conversation. Lucas thanked her for being so patient with Jake's endless questions, explaining that his son had always been naturally social but had few opportunities to interact with new people outside of school. Hannah found herself sharing more than she had intended, mentioning that she had lost her mother 3 years ago and that the holidays had become difficult for her since then. She did not elaborate on the depth of her grief or the way it had gradually isolated her from most of the meaningful relationships in her life, but something in her tone conveyed the weight of what she was not saying. Lucas listened with the same focused attention he had given his son earlier, and Hannah recognized that this was simply how he interacted with the world, fully present and genuinely interested in the experiences of others. He shared that Jake's mother had left when the boy was 3 years old, simply there one day and gone the next, leaving behind only a note saying she was not ready to be a mother and a forwarding address that led to a post office box that was eventually closed. He spoke about this abandonment without bitterness, though Hannah could hear the echo of old pain in his voice, the kind that comes from having to explain to a young child why someone who was supposed to love him unconditionally had chosen to leave instead. When Jake returned from the restroom, he brought with him a small candy cane he had apparently charmed from someone near the counter, and he carefully broke it in half to share with Hannah. The gesture was so spontaneous and generous that Hannah felt something crack open inside her chest, a feeling she had been working very hard to avoid for the past 3 years. She accepted her half of the candy cane with a seriousness that matched Jake's own, recognizing that this was more than just a piece of Christmas candy, but rather an offering of friendship from someone too young to understand the complexity of adult emotional defenses. The rest of their meal passed in the comfortable way of people who had somehow skipped over the usual awkwardness of getting to know strangers. Jake regaled them with his plans for Christmas morning, which involved an elaborate system for categorizing his presents by size and wrapping paper color before opening them in a specific order he had devised. Lucas listened to his son's detailed explanation with the patient interest of someone who had heard variations of this plan many times before, but understood that the anticipation was often more important than the event itself. Hannah found herself genuinely curious about their Christmas traditions, asking questions that drew out stories of previous holidays spent together, just the two of them, creating their own customs in the absence of extended family. As the evening wound down and Lucas insisted on paying the check despite Hannah's protests, she realized that she had not thought about her own loneliness once during the past 2 hours. Instead, she had been fully present in a way she had not experienced since before her mother's illness, engaged with these two people who had somehow managed to breach the careful walls she had constructed around her heart. When Lucas asked if she would like them to walk her back to her car, she found herself hoping the evening would not end quite yet, though she could not bring herself to suggest extending it further. The walk back to the coffee shop where Hannah had left her car was punctuated by Jake's delighted observations about the Christmas lights decorating the various storefronts they passed. He had apparently developed a complex rating system for holiday displays, and he shared his criteria with Hannah as if he were inducting her into some important secret society of Christmas light appreciation. Lucas walked slightly behind them, watching his son's animated gestures and Hannah's increasingly relaxed responses with something that might have been hope, though he was careful not to examine that feeling too closely. When they reached her car, a moment of awkwardness descended as all three of them recognized that this unexpected evening was coming to an end. Jake solved the problem by announcing that Hannah should come to their apartment for Christmas dinner, an invitation he delivered with the absolute confidence that this was obviously the right thing to do. Lucas started to gently explain that Hannah probably had her own family plans, but she surprised them both by saying that she actually did not have any specific plans for Christmas Day. The admission hung in the cold air between them, carrying more weight than such a simple statement should have, and Hannah could see Lucas processing what that meant about her life and her relationships. After a brief hesitation, Lucas extended Jake's invitation more formally, explaining that their Christmas dinner would be nothing elaborate, probably just a small turkey and whatever sides he could manage on his budget, but that they would be honored to have her join them if she truly had no other obligations. Hannah found herself accepting once again, though she insisted on bringing something to contribute to the meal, already mentally calculating what she could prepare that would complement whatever Lucas had planned. As they exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans, she caught herself looking forward to seeing them again, a feeling that was both thrilling and terrifying in its implications. The days leading up to Christmas passed differently than Hannah had experienced in recent years. Instead of dreading the approach of the holiday and the inevitable reminders of her loss, she found herself thinking about Lucas and Jake, wondering what they would enjoy, and planning her contribution to their meal with the kind of care she had not invested in anything for a long time. She decided to make her mother's famous apple pie using the handwritten recipe card that she had kept but never used since her mother's death, and as she worked in her kitchen on Christmas Eve, she could almost hear her mother's gentle corrections about the proper consistency for the filling. Christmas morning arrived with the particular quality of light that comes with fresh snowfall, and Hannah woke with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation rather than the usual heavy dread. She had not celebrated Christmas properly in 3 years, had not bought gifts, or decorated a tree, or done any of the things that had once brought her joy during this season. But as she carefully packed her pie and selected a bottle of wine to bring to Lucas and Jake's apartment, she realized that she was nervous in the way people are nervous about things that matter, not the low-level anxiety she had become accustomed to carrying through most social situations. Lucas and Jake's apartment was on the 3rd floor of an older building that had character in place of modern conveniences, and Hannah could hear Jake's excited voice echoing in the stairwell before she even reached their door. When Lucas answered her knock, she was struck by how different he looked in his own space, more relaxed and confident than he had seemed in the coffee shop or diner. Jake appeared at his father's elbow almost immediately, practically vibrating with Christmas morning excitement, and clearly pleased that their new friend had actually come, as promised. The apartment itself was small but warm, filled with the kind of creative solutions that come from making a loving home on a tight budget. Hannah noticed that most of the Christmas decorations appeared to be handmade, constructed from materials that had clearly been repurposed with care and imagination. The Christmas tree was modest but beautifully decorated, and she could see Jake's handiwork in the construction paper ornaments that hung alongside more traditional decorations. What struck her most was the sense of genuine happiness that permeated the space, the feeling that this was a place where love lived and flourished despite external circumstances. Jake immediately wanted to show Hannah the presents he had received that morning, and she could see that Lucas had somehow managed to make Christmas magical on what was clearly a very limited budget. The gifts were thoughtful rather than expensive, chosen with careful attention to what would bring his son joy rather than what might impress others with their cost. A set of colored pencils and a sketch pad, a puzzle featuring dinosaurs, a warm winter hat with a playful pattern that Jake modeled with obvious pride. Hannah found herself moved by the evidence of Lucas's dedication to making his son's childhood rich in love and attention, even when material resources were scarce. As Lucas worked in the small kitchen preparing their dinner, Hannah offered to help and found herself assigned to mashing potatoes, while Jake provided a running commentary on his father's cooking techniques. She learned that Lucas had taught himself to cook through trial and error after becoming a single father, gradually developing a repertoire of meals that Jake would actually eat while trying to maintain some nutritional balance on their tight grocery budget. The easy teamwork they developed as they prepared the meal felt natural and comfortable, as if they had been cooking together for years rather than having met just a few days earlier. During dinner, Jake regaled them with his theories about the logistics of Christmas gift delivery, wondering aloud how Santa Claus coordinated with families who did not have chimneys and whether reindeer required special landing permits for urban areas. Lucas answered his son's questions with the perfect balance of gentle humor and respect for the importance of maintaining Christmas magic, and Hannah found herself contributing to their playful speculation with ideas she had not even realized she still possessed. The conversation flowed around topics both silly and serious, creating the kind of shared experience that transforms a simple meal into a cherished memory. As they finished eating and began clearing the table, Jake announced that he had made something special for Hannah, disappearing into his bedroom and returning with a small wrapped package that he had clearly prepared himself. The wrapping paper was secured with far more tape than necessary, and Hannah could see where he had carefully written her name in his developing second-grade handwriting. When she expressed surprise that he had made her a gift, Jake explained with 7-year-old logic that she was their friend now, and friends always gave each other Christmas presents, so obviously he had needed to make her something special. Hannah opened the package with the exaggerated care that such gifts deserve, peeling away each piece of tape while Jake bounced with anticipation beside her. Inside was a small wooden ornament that had been painted with meticulous attention to detail, and her breath caught in her throat as she recognized what Jake had created. The ornament was shaped like a heart-shaped locket, painted in the soft blue that had been her mother's favorite color, and Hannah realized with stunning clarity that it bore an unmistakable resemblance to the necklace her mother had worn every day for as long as Hannah could remember. The necklace had been lost during one of her mother's final hospital stays, misplaced in the chaos of medical equipment and shift changes, and the overwhelming focus on trying to extend her life by any means possible. Hannah had searched everywhere for it in the weeks following her mother's death, needing something tangible to hold on to, but it had simply vanished as completely as her mother's voice and touch and presence. She had grieved the loss of that necklace almost as intensely as she had grieved her mother's death, feeling as though she had failed to protect even the simplest physical reminder of their connection. Jake was watching her reaction with growing concern, clearly worried that his gift had somehow missed the mark, and Hannah realized that tears were streaming down her face in a way that might be alarming to a child who had been trying to do something kind. She quickly reassured him that she loved the ornament, that it was the most beautiful gift anyone had ever made for her, though her voice wavered with the intensity of emotion she was struggling to contain. Lucas was watching from across the room with an expression of gentle concern, clearly recognizing that something significant was happening, but uncertain whether he should intervene or allow the moment to unfold naturally. Hannah knelt down to Jake's level and asked him how he had known to make an ornament that looked so much like something that had been important to her, though she realized, even as she asked, that there was no way he could have known about her mother's necklace. Jake explained, with the earnest confidence of a child, that he had simply wanted to make her something that would remind her that she was not alone anymore, that she had friends who cared about her. He had chosen the heart shape because hearts meant love, and the blue color because it seemed peaceful, like her eyes when she was not looking sad, and the locket shape because lockets were supposed to hold precious things inside them. The simple wisdom of his explanation undid something fundamental in Hannah's chest, and she found herself crying in earnest now, not the careful, controlled tears she had allowed herself over the past 3 years, but the kind of deep, healing sobs that come when grief finally begins to transform into something else. Lucas moved closer, uncertain whether to offer comfort or give her space, but Jake had no such hesitation, wrapping his small arms around her neck and patting her back with the unself-conscious compassion that children offer when they recognize genuine pain in the adults around them. Through her tears, Hannah tried to explain to Jake why his gift meant so much to her, telling him about her mother's necklace and how losing it had felt like losing the last tangible connection to someone she loved more than anything in the world. Jake listened with the focused attention he gave to all important information, and when she finished speaking, he carefully took the ornament from her hands and hung it on the Christmas tree, explaining that now it would watch over all of them and keep her mother's love close by, where it belonged. Lucas watched this exchange with something approaching awe, recognizing that his son had somehow managed to offer exactly what this wounded woman needed most. Though neither of them could have planned or predicted such a moment, he saw how Hannah's entire posture had changed as she knelt beside the tree with Jake, the rigid control she had maintained since he first met her, finally giving way to something more open and vulnerable. When she looked up at him, with tears still streaming down her face, but with something like hope beginning to bloom in her expression, he felt his own carefully maintained emotional boundaries beginning to shift in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the three of them settled into the comfortable intimacy that sometimes emerges when people have shared something real and significant together. Jake curled up on the couch between Hannah and his father, eventually falling asleep with his head against Hannah's shoulder, and she found herself stroking his hair with the natural tenderness of someone who had been missing the opportunity to care for others. Lucas watched this gentle interaction and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since Jake's mother left. A cautious hope that perhaps their small family might not have to remain quite so small forever. They talked quietly as Jake slept, sharing stories about their childhoods and their losses and their dreams for the future, with the kind of honesty that only seems possible when normal social barriers have been temporarily dissolved. Hannah learned that Lucas had wanted to be a teacher before circumstances forced him to prioritize immediate financial stability over long-term career goals, and that he still sometimes imagined returning to school once Jake was older and more independent. Lucas discovered that Hannah had studied art in college, but had gradually moved away from creating anything herself as she became increasingly focused on the practical demands of adult life, though she still felt a deep longing to return to painting someday, when she felt brave enough to risk exposing her inner world to external judgment. As evening deepened and Jake woke from his nap, the question of when Hannah should leave began to hang unspoken in the air around them. None of them seemed eager to end what had become the most meaningful Christmas any of them had experienced in years. But the practical realities of work schedules and normal life routines demanded acknowledgement. When Hannah finally stood to gather her things, Jake immediately asked when she would come back to visit them, and she found herself promising to see them again soon without really thinking about what that commitment might entail. Lucas walked her to the door, while Jake gathered up the wrapping paper from his presents, and in the relative privacy of the hallway, he thanked her for giving his son such a wonderful Christmas. He started to say something else, but seemed to change his mind, and Hannah could see him wrestling with words he was not quite ready to speak aloud. Instead, he simply told her that she was welcome in their home any time, that both he and Jake had felt her absence in their lives before they even knew she existed, and that spending Christmas together had felt like finding a missing piece of something important they had not realized was incomplete. Hannah drove home through the quiet Christmas evening streets, with Jake's ornament carefully secured in her passenger seat and her heart fuller than it had been in 3 years. She realized that somewhere between accepting a spontaneous dinner invitation and receiving a handmade gift from a 7-year-old boy, she had begun to remember who she used to be before grief taught her to protect herself through isolation. The ornament represented more than just a thoughtful Christmas gift. It was a bridge back to the part of herself that believed in the possibility of love and connection and the healing power of letting others into the carefully guarded spaces of her heart. In the weeks that followed Christmas, Hannah found herself thinking about Lucas and Jake with increasing frequency, remembering the easy warmth of their holiday together and wondering whether the connection she had felt was real or simply the product of seasonal emotion and temporary vulnerability. She carried Jake's ornament with her in her purse, touching it occasionally throughout her workdays like a talisman that reminded her that kindness still existed in the world and that she was capable of receiving it when she allowed herself to be open to the possibility. Lucas called her 3 days after Christmas, ostensibly to thank her again for the apple pie, but really because Jake had been asking about her every day, and he found himself curious about how she was adjusting to normal life after their shared holiday experience. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour, meandering through topics that seemed important and trivial in equal measure. And when Lucas finally asked if she would like to have dinner with them again the following weekend, Hannah accepted without hesitation, surprising herself with how eager she was to return to their small apartment and the particular kind of joy that seemed to flourish there. The second dinner was different from Christmas Day, less emotionally charged, but perhaps more significant in its ordinariness. Hannah helped Jake with a school project about winter animals, while Lucas prepared a simple meal, and she found herself falling naturally into rhythms that felt both foreign and familiar, as if she were remembering how to be part of a family after years of existing solely as an individual. Jake showed her his drawings and asked for her opinion on which colored pencils worked best for different effects, and Hannah rediscovered the particular pleasure of seeing the world through a child's eyes, where creativity was more important than perfection and enthusiasm mattered more than technical skill. As January progressed into February, their dinners together became a regular tradition, sometimes at Lucas and Jake's apartment and sometimes at Hannah's house, where Jake was fascinated by her collection of art books and the small studio space she had not used in over 2 years. Lucas encouraged her to show Jake some of her old paintings, stored carefully in a closet where she had tried to forget about them, and seeing his genuine admiration for her work sparked something she had thought was permanently extinguished. She began sketching again, tentatively at first, drawing simple pictures for Jake that gradually evolved into more complex compositions as her confidence slowly returned. The shift from friendship to something deeper happened gradually, built on shared meals and quiet conversations and the thousands of small moments that create intimacy between people who are learning to trust each other. Hannah watched Lucas navigate the complexities of single parenthood with grace and humor, never complaining about the sacrifices required, but clearly prioritizing his son's well-being above his own comfort in ways that revealed the depth of his character. Lucas observed Hannah's gradual transformation from someone who seemed to be merely surviving each day to someone who was beginning to actively engage with life again, and he felt privileged to witness her slow return to the vibrant person she had been before grief taught her to hide. One evening in early March, after Jake had fallen asleep during a movie they were watching together, Hannah and Lucas found themselves talking about their fears and hopes with the kind of vulnerable honesty that marks the transition from friendship to love. Hannah admitted that she was terrified of caring about them too much, of allowing herself to become invested in their happiness, only to lose them the way she had lost her mother. Lucas shared his own fear that his complicated circumstances and financial limitations made him a poor choice for someone like Hannah, who deserved stability and security rather than the constant juggling act that characterized his daily life. The conversation that followed was neither dramatic nor particularly romantic in any conventional sense, but it was real in a way that Hollywood rarely captures, full of hesitations and qualifications and the careful honesty of people who have been hurt before and are trying to be wise about the risks they take with their hearts. They acknowledged the growing feelings between them, while also recognizing the practical complications that would need to be navigated, the need to consider Jake's emotional well-being above their own desires, and the importance of building something sustainable rather than simply following the momentum of attraction and affection. When Hannah finally went home that night, she carried with her the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted between them, that they had crossed an invisible line that separated friendship from the possibility of something more profound. She lay awake thinking about Lucas's gentle way of moving through the world and Jake's irrepressible joy, and the way both of them had somehow managed to teach her that love did not have to mean loss, that opening her heart again did not automatically guarantee that it would be broken again in the same way. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a sense of renewal that Hannah had not experienced since before her mother's illness. She began painting again in earnest, creating canvases filled with the colors and light she saw when she was with Lucas and Jake, trying to capture the feeling of belonging somewhere and to someone after years of drifting through life without any real sense of home. Lucas started talking about his dreams of returning to school with renewed seriousness, researching education programs that might accommodate his work schedule, and considering the possibility that his life might contain more opportunities than he had previously dared to imagine. The first time Lucas kissed her was on a Saturday afternoon in April, while Jake was playing in the small park near his apartment, and they were sitting on a bench watching him navigate the playground equipment with the fearless confidence that belongs exclusively to childhood. It was not a dramatic moment, no sweeping orchestral music or perfectly timed sunset. Just two people who had been moving slowly toward each other for months, finally allowing themselves to acknowledge what had been building between them. The kiss was gentle and questioning, full of the tender uncertainty that comes when people who have been careful with their hearts decide to take a risk on love. Jake's reaction to the growing romance between his father and Hannah was characteristically direct and enthusiastic. He had been advocating for Hannah to move in with them since February, reasoning with 7-year-old logic that she was already part of their family and should therefore live in their apartment, where she belonged. When Lucas gently explained that relationships required time to develop properly and that there were adult considerations Jake might not fully understand, the boy listened with the patience of someone who trusts the adults in his life to make reasonable decisions about important matters, even when those decisions seemed unnecessarily complicated from his perspective. Summer brought new routines and deeper intimacy as Hannah became increasingly integrated into the daily rhythms of Lucas and Jake's life together. She attended Jake's Little League games and helped him with his summer reading assignments, discovering that she had a natural gift for making learning feel like play rather than work. Lucas began including her in his long-term planning, asking for her input on decisions about Jake's education and their living situation, with the assumption that she would be part of their future in whatever form it ultimately took. The conversation about moving in together happened organically one evening in August, after Hannah had essentially been staying at their apartment for 2 weeks straight without any of them really noticing the transition. Jake pointed out that she was already living with them in everything but name, and that it seemed silly for her to keep paying rent on an apartment she never used when she could just bring her art supplies to their place and turn the small second bedroom into a proper studio. Lucas was more hesitant, worried about the practical implications of combining their lives so completely, but Hannah found herself drawn to the idea of making their informal family arrangement official. The logistics of merging two established lives proved more complex than any of them had anticipated, requiring negotiations about everything from grocery shopping responsibilities to bedtime routines to the delicate balance of maintaining individual identity within a committed relationship. But underneath these practical considerations was a deeper current of joy and rightness that sustained them through the inevitable adjustments and occasional conflicts that come when people learn to live together as a family unit. By Christmas of that second year, the ornament Jake had made for Hannah the previous December had been joined by dozens of others. A collection that represented all the small celebrations and milestones that had marked their journey from strangers to friends to family. Hannah had painted several canvases depicting their life together, not sentimental portraits, but abstract compositions that captured the emotional landscape of belonging somewhere completely and being known by people who chose to love her exactly as she was. Lucas had enrolled in evening classes toward his teaching certificate, supported by Hannah's encouragement and practical help with Jake's care during his study hours. Jake had adjusted to their blended family with the resilience that children display when the adults in their lives provide consistent love and security, and he had begun referring to Hannah as his bonus mom in casual conversation, a designation that never failed to make her heart swell with a happiness she had not known was possible. The proposal, when it finally came, was as understated and genuine as everything else about their relationship had been. Lucas asked her to marry him on a quiet Sunday morning in January while they were making pancakes together, and Jake was still asleep. reasoning that he wanted to spend the rest of his life having lazy weekend mornings with her, and that marriage seemed like the most logical way to ensure that possibility. Hannah said yes, while covered in flour and wearing one of his old t-shirts, and they celebrated by waking Jake up to share the news, and then spending the day planning a simple wedding that would focus on the commitment they were making rather than the event itself. They married in May, in the small community center where Jake played basketball, surrounded by the modest collection of friends and co-workers who had witnessed their journey from that first chance meeting in the coffee shop to this moment of public commitment to building a life together. Hannah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Lucas wore the one good suit he owned with a tie that Jake had helped him pick out because it had small dinosaurs printed on it that were only visible if you looked closely. The wedding was everything Hannah had never known she wanted. Simple and joyful and focused on the essential truth that love could indeed conquer the practical complications that seemed so insurmountable when examined individually. Jake served as both ring-bearer and best man, taking his responsibilities seriously and delivering a short speech about how happy he was that Hannah was officially joining their family, because now they could stop pretending she did not already belong there completely. As they danced to the small collection of songs they had chosen for their reception, Hannah thought about the ornament that had started everything, the handmade gift that had somehow managed to bridge the space between her grief and her capacity for new love. She understood now that healing did not mean forgetting or replacing what had been lost, but rather learning to expand her heart large enough to hold both her memories of her mother and her love for this new family that had chosen her as completely as she had chosen them. The future stretched ahead of them, with all its ordinary challenges and extraordinary possibilities, but Hannah no longer faced it alone. She had learned that one dinner invitation from a 7-year-old boy could indeed change everything, that kindness offered without expectation of return had the power to heal wounds that seemed permanent, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come wrapped in the simplest packages, from the hands of people who love us enough to see what we need before we even know we need it ourselves.